we are going to our second theme, and the statement that will go with this theme actually got slightly over 22% of the votes in the LinkedIn poll, and with that was the second most popular statement. All right, we are going to talk about employee experience, and employee monitoring in particular here is a growing practice in which companies use digital tools to track work, employee performance, and work in progress. Businesses use different monitoring methods to measure productivity, track attendance, assess behavior, ensure security, and prevent things like internal theft. With the shift to hybrid work, 85% of leaders have trouble believing their workers are being productive. Knowing this, it comes as no surprise that the demand for employee monitoring software has skyrocketed since the pandemic. According to one report, searches for employee monitoring software rose by 75% in March 2020 compared with the 2019 monthly average, and demand remains strong both in 2021 and 2022. A report from ExpressVPN found that close to 80%, that is 80, of employers use monitoring software to track employee performance and online activity. As mentioned, employee monitoring tools aren't just used for monitoring employees. They can also increase a company's online security and reduce the risk of data breaches. Unsurprisingly, the same report from ExpressVPN also showed that employees who know that they are being watched report feeling more anxiety and pressure. Monitored employees are also substantially more likely to take unapproved breaks and purposely work at a slow pace. Finally, employee monitoring can diminish morale and expose sensitive data. At the end of the day, there seems to be a fine line between monitoring employees fairly and rather dystopian situations that could come straight out of an episode of Black Mirror. And this is exactly what makes this topic perfect for HR Debatable in the form of the following statement. Employee monitoring is necessary for productivity and security. Barry, this time I will start with you. What do you vote?
I'm wholeheartedly agreeing with that statement.
Thank you. Laura, what do you vote?
Wholeheartedly disagree with the statement.
All right, very interesting. Barry, I'm going to go back to you. Please elaborate.
Okay, look, how do we unpack this one? It's clearly nuanced, yep. So those sitting at home having watched their episodes of Black Mirror and who love a good dystopian conspiracy will all clearly be burning their torches and running to their car parks, chasing me on this. But the reality of it is, look, for the latter half of it, no great surprise. Cybersecurity is a massive growth area due to the enormous levels of sophistication in terms of cybercrime that exists at this moment. I operate in that SME market. I have seen it firsthand. The outcome of that has been people have ultimately had to lose their jobs given losses made by businesses for some very sophisticated theft that has gone on. And for that reason, the decision amongst individuals to play their part to me is an absolute given. I think the other one that, then begins to encroach around employee experience is, look, we are still in that knowledge working area, working out exactly what the world after the world that we had before, when we all used to turn up, our parents and grandparents, into the big box in the sky and sat there all day and never left with banks and banks. We've now got a hybrid. We've now got a remote. All three of us are living the dream currently on this. And I think that issue of the trade-off, and I think there is a trade-off at this moment around inputs and outcomes, is a relationship with the employer needing to understand what is going on, if that is a trade-off for not being there and not being on premise and allowing a more positive outlook in terms of conversation around those outcomes that do take place, around some of the ability to remind people that what they're doing and being paid for in terms of that sort of exchange in a social contract does bear responsibility for the people who are pairing on that. I think our direction of travel, we better get used to it, is about outcomes. We're back to, being less, I think, about the ability to prove that we are actually sitting there and actually moving more towards a world where it will be about outcomes. Those outcomes will need validated, they'll need verified, and they will need to be done so in exchange for a currency and paying for that. That will all require some type of transaction that will look like monitoring. Have you done what you said you would do? Yes, you have. I will pay you X amount of shekels for doing that particular piece of work, etc., etc. So, look, I think there's an acceptance until we find something better, that trade-off in the social contract between an employer who ultimately needs to keep that enterprise going has, I think, duty-bound people in and around our organization to respect monitoring for a variety of reasons.
Thank you, Barry. All right, Laura, let's hear it from the other side.
So when I gave a big fat no, the bit that I'm giving a no to is, and I've actually spoken to a few of these organizations, are companies who feel they need to monitor by checking how long people are online for each day. By actually physically watching them, they can connect to their camera and watch them whilst they work. I mean, that's just really creepy and really weird. I don't know why they need to do that. And it's this micromanagement, which I appreciate. Some people, they do need micromanaging. There's different management styles. Not everybody. It can absolutely drown some of us. Sadly, monitoring has risen due to managers not knowing how to manage remote workers. They just didn't know how to make that change, not being with them all the time, so they may as well watch them and track what they're doing all the time. I think if we can give our managers more support, more coaching, more training, bite-sized training, then we'll be able to help them to support their teams to work in patterns that helps them to have the highest outcomes. So it starts with having clear objectives per person. You can use a project management tool if you need to use that, and put them on there and put dates on there and things. And you can even chat to them in the morning for 15 minutes and ask them what they're doing that day. But I think then you need to trust your people and let them work in the way that works for them. My employee, for example, in my most current business, she would actually work in the morning, we'd have our meeting, she'd take the day off. She'd come back in the evening and she'd work for 3-4 hours, she'd get everything done. And I had no problem with that. And I think there's a saying, or at least I heard it from my wife actually, if someone's in the forest walking for 75% of the day and they get back to the office and they get their work done in 25%, what's wrong with that? So I think we need to be outcome based. As Barry was saying, it's about having those clear definable outcomes, but we don't need to watch them, we don't need to strangle them. And I think you're creating an environment of fear rather than an environment of psychological safety. And you want to create a culture of trust from the very beginning. Even in the interview process, if they say they're going to be watching me, I'm just like, no, I don't want to work for you because you sound a bit creepy. So, but on the cybersecurity side, yeah, we definitely want to be having training organizations, partners. I know some fantastic companies who give the ongoing training. They drip feed, emails and things like that to check who's clicking on, clickbait, etc. But that doesn't mean you need to be watching people whilst they're working.
All right, Barry, is there anything you would like to say in reply to this?
Yes, there is.
All right.
Look, the biggest proponents on this, and this is where the very obvious strain is taking place. Large, complex, bureaucratic organizations are beginning to lean in, I think, to an adjacent problem, and hopefully, well, you can bleep this out, but it's because we have so much bullshit jobs in large, complex organizations. So the looking back and the realization that the mood music in lots of these companies are very much dependent on what value and work that gets done. And what I mean by that, I mean everything from the first quarter, hey, you people over there, we have no investment for a technology adoption. And therefore, I'm going to have to find ways to create work, to get through the day, to manage my boredom, and have this ritual that exists around it. We have a board meeting in 3 weeks and everybody does that weird and wonderful ritual where nobody takes into account the first presentation deck because the highest paid person needs to run their eye over it and opine and whatever. So the monitoring, the bit that we all say, and we all know the direction of travel is outcome, yeah? But actually the reality is that we are locked into a 40-hour week, 5 days, justifying of an existence. It's why I go out and sell something called fractional, because I've basically looked in the eyes of this thing that basically says we're not productive for 40 hours a week. You know, this whole idea, this myth that exists there can't be said by anybody other than someone like me on the outside looking in. But the idea that we're in there is actually a big structural issue, that 150-year-old deal when we couldn't chunk up work is the Monday to Friday because the unions managed to get Saturday and Sunday, you know, as a rest period. But we'd have been talking 7 days a week, you know, had we not have got that, has fallen apart. And so outcomes comes on the other side of it with a challenge on hours, a challenge on presenteeism, sitting at a desk, plugging in and being ready, and all of the strains and rules and rituals and habits that run with it. And to me, monitoring is just one sideshow in the manager, the organization, everybody else playing a ridiculous dance that we all need to stop doing and being more honest with ourselves. But a bit like our previous, we're not really in the place to go to this new accepted norm yet. You know, despite people like myself and freelancers and elsewhere, you know, there is still a dance going on that doesn't allow us to say, do you know what? I'm completely and utterly under-resourced, underproductive today for these reasons, several hours. You know, if you're looking at me on the camera here, you know, I'll be literally smoking and playing, you know, some game. Yeah, I don't care. That's what I'm doing. Yeah, but you won't. Yeah, you'll sit there on Slack and send ridiculous messages and it irritate people. So let's, you know, talk about the level of honesty that brings monitoring. You know, people don't go, I'm joining the workplace because I'm a sociopath and I want to spend my whole time checking in on, you know, Laura's video camera to understand is she actually doing bloody work for me. You know, those people exist, but incredibly small numbers. Work is broken, and monitoring is a big part of, I think, a manifestation of that at the moment.
Thank you, Barry. All right, Laura, anything you want to say to that?
Yeah, so I don't think work's broken. I've actually been working at the remote-based jobs, I guess, or remote-based businesses since 2013, before all the COVID stuff and everyone suddenly tried to give it a go. I was very, very lucky to work for some fantastic managers who didn't micromanage, very much outcome-based, and gave me the best experiences and really taught me, I suppose, those basic fundamentals of how to manage and look after and really care for your remote workers and show them you're invested in them. I think this hourly rate thing is really a very old-fashioned concept from when we were working in factories. I don't think people need to be there for 8 hours or whatever. I think as long as they get their work done, they get it done in the amount of time that works for them. Most people, they actually get their work done in 3 to 4 hours of the day. The rest of the time, they spend in a lot of meetings that they don't need to have, very long meetings, video ones. And then they spend it probably wondering what they're supposed to be doing. And then they spend it with all these millions of platforms, like you say, with the Slacks and things like that. People contact them all the time. Something I do when I'm onboarding people is I get them to knock out in their, to set up in their diary 3 hours of the day, whichever time works for them, and when they feel that they're most productive. That could be in the evening, could be in the afternoon, could be in the morning, whatever. But I get them to set that aside so that they have no meetings in that time. They have it on their signature strip of their email that this is when they're out and they're focusing. They could go to a park if they want to and do their work, you know, but it's 3 hours that they can actually get into flow and actually get their work done. Whereas I found the problem with remote working, especially leaders in remote working environments, is that they work too much. And if anything, they're at massive risk of burnout most of the time. They're doing their work day, which is 8 hours or whatever. And then in the evenings, they're actually catching up on their work because they finally get a bit of peace and quiet. So I think helping people to create, and again, it's all about supporting the leaders to be great leaders and great managers, and sort of helping them to work out with their teams, what is it that works for them, which hours work for them. I appreciate there are some jobs you just can't do that with, like support is one that's quite challenging, customer success, but there are others that, you know, as long as we get our outcomes, we have clear definable outcomes, as long as we get them done, let's do it in the way that works for us and flexibly. And again, that then opens it up to people with diverse backgrounds, ADHD, you know, autism. It's letting them work in environments and in time frames that's going to be best for them.
Thank you. I'm going to wrap this up, this debate. Thank you very much. I have to say, and this is what I really like about being the host of this podcast, is that it really gets me different perspectives as well. And I have to say, what Barry was saying, because I obviously, when I prepare for these statements, I have an idea in mind, right? And what Barry was saying, though, about the bullshit jobs, and I know that this is actually also an HR trend, like the 2024 will or will not mark the end of bullshit jobs. So it's definitely something. I was thinking about that, Barry, when you were talking, and about my own experience over the past 15 years in different companies. And I'm just going to say it, there were a lot of people that were just sitting there. And the thing is, just before, as we were present, this presenteeism, it looked like we were busy behind the computer or whatsoever. And I guess what is possible is that what this remote or hybrid setup has made apparent is that a lot of us were actually not necessarily doing all that much. We were just pretending. And I kind of like this idea of, let's be honest about that. And I can also see how potentially the whole monitoring thing comes from that idea. So very interesting. Thank you very much for that. It really made me think, because I tended to be more like on Laura's perspective on this, and I'm not saying I'm not anymore, but I think this is a very fair point that you're making, Barry, and I think definitely this is something that we need to be honest about, and I think indeed that the whole monitoring is a symptom of that. But
I think we both come from different backgrounds, Barry. I think you've worked actually with large organizations, whereas I've worked with companies, maybe a maximum of 100 people, maybe 200, but where everyone, if anything, are doing 3-4 jobs, because it's like startup environment, it's all bootstrap, everyone's in a budget. Whereas you've worked with companies, we've got nice big budgets, they've got thousands of people working for them. I haven't worked with those organizations, so different experience, different backgrounds.
But to even take my controversy further, we have bullshit jobs. We have to admit we have bullshit roles. And I'm also increasingly, regardless of size, putting in the Museum of Horrors managers and leaders in the exact same museum. Yeah, the idea that those people we talked about earlier and ourselves, capable, mature adults don't want to be followers. And a lot of what we still teach and what brings monitoring and requires that, is this over-engineered steering and checking and whatever that ultimately corrodes any level of enjoyment at work. So one of the things on the bucket list is we're going to need to sort out this old-fashioned social, democratic or otherwise undemocratic philosophy, which is management, inside our organizations. And I don't see enough of that being challenged, even in startups. They get to a level of scale and they start talking about the old way of doing things rather than recognizing that what people need is they've turned up motivated. All you can do is demotivate me. And a very light touch leaderships can mean different things rather than the role that checks and monitors, either analog or digital.
Laura, any final thoughts you want to share before we move on?
Just a tiny one, I guess. I guess it's the importance of our leaders becoming coaches of their people and actually understanding how to ask the right questions and find what works for their individuals, and supporting them to be able to adapt their leadership style as needed.
Get them out of the road. Huh? Get them out of the road. Stop it teaching them to ask better questions. Just get them out of the road. Let people get on with their job.
Yeah, but some people do need that extra support. They do need those touch points, whereas other people, leave them alone for a week. Let them crack on with it. But some people, if they don't hear from their leader, and they'll tell them. I've had someone tell me, Laura, it's really weird. You haven't asked to meet with me for the last 2-3 days, and I'm like, yeah, because you've been cracking on with your work. And they're like, oh, and they didn't feel very comfortable with it, and I sort of felt that it almost demotivated them. So I was like, okay, I'll put in a meeting, we'll have a chat every morning, because that's what worked for them. But I think sometimes it's just listening and seeing what works. I appreciate if you're leading a team, 100 people or something, it becomes very different. And you almost need to really spread things out, because in the day you can't have one-to-ones with everybody. But it really depends on the size of the business, size of the teams. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this second debate.